Number 6 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on International Trade. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. The Board of Internal Economy, of course, requires that committees adhere to the following health protocols, which are in effect until February 28, 2022. So anyone with symptoms, of course, should participate by Zoom and not attend in person. Masks must be worn in committee rooms except when members are at their place. All those inside the committee room should follow best practices of maintaining a physical distance of at least 2 meters from each other. As the chair, I will enforce these measures, and I thank you for your cooperation. Few rules for today. Interpretation, of course, is available. You may speak in the official language of your choice. At the bottom of your screen, you have the choice of either floor, English, or French. Any problem with interpretation, please get my attention, and we will stop the meeting and get it corrected immediately. Raise hand features on the main toolbar should you wish to speak. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. A reminder, all comments are to be made through the chair. The committee clerk and I will maintain a speaking list for all members. We are continuing on with a study of the Canada-United States relationships and its impacts on the electrical vehicles, softwood lumber, and other important sectors. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, January 31st, the committee is beginning its study of the modernization of the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. With us today by video conference are Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, Jay Allen, Director General Trade Negotiations, Darren Smith, Acting Director General Trade-in Services, Intellectual Property and Investment, Andrew Turner, Director, Eastern Europe and Eurasia Division, Dean Foster, Director, Trade Negotiations, Africa, Americas, Europe, India, Middle East, and Sean Clark, Director, Trade Agreement Secretariat, and from the Department of Finance, Ven Liquas, the Director. Welcome to you all. Apologies for being a few minutes delayed this afternoon. We will start with 5 minutes of opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. Mr. Allen, I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Allen.
Thank you. Good afternoon, committee members, and thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on the status of the modernization of the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement, or as you'll hear me refer to it, CIIT. To begin, I will provide an update of our trade relations with the Ukraine before delving into the modernization of CIIT. In 2020, total bilateral merchandise trade between Canada and Ukraine was $305 million. With Canadian exports valued at $161 million, led by fish and seafood, vehicles, and machinery. Canada's imports from Ukraine stood at $144 million, led by electrical machinery, fats and oils, and machinery. Canadian investment in Ukraine stood at $81 million in 2020. Preliminary data for 2021 shows that overall bilateral trade between Canada and Ukraine saw significant growth, with an increase of over 25% from 2020, surpassing $400 million in total bilateral trade for the first time. The CIIT was negotiated between 2010 and 2015 and entered into force on August 1st, 2017. Upon entry into force, Ukraine immediately eliminated tariffs on approximately 86% of Ukraine's imports from Canada, and Canada immediately eliminated tariffs on 99.9% of imports from Ukraine. The balance of tariff concessions is to be implemented by January 1st, 2024. While CIIT is a comprehensive FTA, free trade agreement, from a trade and goods standpoint, it does not cover services or investment due to significant differences in positions at the time. The CIIT includes a review clause that committed the parties to review the agreement within 2 years of its entry into force, with a view to expanding it. The review clause specifically identifies cross-border trade and services, financial services, investment, telecommunications, and temporary entry, but does not restrict parties from exploring other areas. We're going to work with Ukraine to include not only the provisions covered in the review clause, but also to expand the agreement into new areas, and we will seek to update some of the existing chapters too. Provisions covering cross-border trade and services, financial services, investment, and temporary entry of business persons would increase transparency and predictability, reducing uncertainty to service providers. Updated disciplines on domestic regulation and mutual recognition agreement guidelines for professionals would also facilitate services trade. The Canada-Ukraine Foreign Investment Protection and Promotion Agreement, or FIPA, which entered into force in 1995, provides a baseline of protection to Canadian investors in Ukraine, but it is an older FIPA based on an earlier model agreement, and there is scope to modernize it. The CUFTA review clause also offers an opportunity to pursue a more comprehensive and inclusive agreement. Canada will seek to add new provisions on good regulatory practices, trade and gender, trade and Indigenous peoples, and trade and SMEs, among other updates. Modernization of the CUFTA offers an opportunity to increase the agreement's benefits for Canadian workers, entrepreneurs, and small businesses, while advancing fair, inclusive, and transparent trade with Ukraine. This review process formally started in July 2019, when Prime Minister Trudeau and Ukrainian President Zelensky announced that they had agreed to expand the agreement. Following our respective internal preparations and a pause due to COVID-19, Ukrainian officials confirmed in September 2021 that they were ready to proceed. And on January 27, 2022, Minister Ng and Ukraine's Minister of Economy, Yulia Sviridenko, announced the launch of negotiations. The modernization of CUFTA is a clear demonstration of Canada's steadfast commitment to Ukraine. Modernization of the agreement will help build commercial ties and contribute to long-term security, stability, and broad-based economic development in Ukraine. Indeed, our Ukrainian partners welcomed the launch of our negotiations last month through the same lens. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Allen. Very much appreciated the information. On to questions from the committee members. Mr. Martel, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being with us today. Of course, my first question is going to be put to Foreign Affairs. I've clearly seen that there are different opinions about the imminence of a Russian attack. President Biden seems certain that an attack can come up in the very short term. However, President Zelensky doesn't seem as certain of that, and he's calling on Western leaders to be prudent in their rhetoric with Russia. So I'd like to know whether we're actually putting oil on the fire of a conflict that could be avoided.
Thank you for the question. With respect, I would say no. I don't think so. I think what we're doing is signaling our strong and continuing support for Ukrainian people. The Prime Minister has been very clear. Minister Ng has been very clear. Minister Joly has been very clear that we stand with the people of Ukraine, and this is an opportunity to demonstrate that. We absolutely abhor the situation, the buildup on the border. And fundamentally, we think that this is a signal of our continuing confidence in the government. And I would turn to my colleague, Andrew Turner, who is our expert on relations with Ukraine, to see if Andrew has anything he'd like to add.
No, I think you've summed this up well. We have confidence in Ukraine, and the Ukrainian government has asked us to launch discussions for modernization of the agreement. And given that they are not responsible for this current crisis, it's completely Russia's responsibility that's building up troops in the region. And thus, we are very happy to proceed with discussions for modernization as requested by the Ukrainian government. France and Germany seem to be much more in favour of using diplomacy to avoid the conflict, and their leaders are in Moscow today and also Kiev to try and de-escalate this situation. Now, the fact that Germany and France are dependent on gas, does that actually lead to their diplomatic and military stance vis-à-vis this conflict?
With respect, Madam Chair, as a trade negotiator, I feel unqualified to respond to that question. I can ask my colleague, Mr. Turner, if he has any thoughts, but.
Thank you very much, Mr. Allen. We're here to discuss trade, and we have the trade officials, but naturally members are going to raise other concerns given the situation as well.
Okay. Alors, je vais passer.
Well, I go into my next question. In March 2021, Canada said that they were signing an agreement on energy with Germany to send more natural gas to reduce their dependence on Russia. So how is Canada going to increase the production of LNG that's available for exports to be able to meet its commitment?
Madam Chair, I find myself at a loss to answer that question. Again, I'll turn to Mr. Turner to see if he has any information.
Certainly, we're continuing our discussions with our partner allies to encourage the export of LNG and other strategies to reduce their dependence on supplies from Russia. But certainly, if we look at the official discourse that we've seen from Germany and France and also from all the other G7 countries and also from NATO, they've been very clear that they are ready to take severe measures if there is a military invasion carried out by Russia. So in terms of economic links and energy links, that certainly does not reduce the unity of our efforts to avoid a conflict and to pursue diplomatic solutions.
Martel, I'm sorry, I think your time is almost up. Okay,
Déjà?
thank you.
Already?
Mr. Varani, and I'd like to acknowledge we have Mr. Baker with us as well today, later on in the question period. Mr. Varani?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So as a Member of Parliament in Toronto who represents a large number of Ukrainian Canadian constituents, let me just say that they've been communicating with me extensively over the past 6.5 years, but never more so than now, and indicating appreciation for some of the things that you've just mentioned in terms of the efforts by Minister Joly, the Prime Minister, Minister Ng, things like Operation Unifier, Operation Reassurance, sanctions that we've imposed. They've also taken note of things such as the sovereign loan that was just provided about 2 weeks ago, roughly, of $120 million. And I want to pick up there because it seems to me that there's some consistency between a sovereign loan to meet immediate economic needs, but also with what we're trying to do with a new and modernized CUFTA agreement. So I'm wondering if you could help us understand as committee members how things such as a modernized CUFTA agreement that is reopening what was already a successful document helps to embrace some of that economic liberalization and economic empowerment that therefore leads to a situation where Ukraine is reinforced in terms of its own sovereignty and its own security. So if you could help us connect those two dots, please, Mr. Allen.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Fundamentally, a trade agreement is about establishing a relationship, and it's about building that relationship. And in the case of Ukraine, one of the fundamental purposes of this agreement was to help the economic development in Ukraine. And the original agreement was based around tariffs, and it allowed trade in goods to flow between us. This offers an opportunity to help to integrate Ukraine into the international trade and services. It also will help to make Ukraine a more attractive investment location. When a country moves in a direction of adopting the types of commitments that we put into our FTAs, it allows them to show the international community that they're rising to that level. And it's that level of predictability and certainty that these sorts of changes will inspire within these sorts of agreements will inspire within their government. Those changes are what will attract trade and what will attract investment. And ultimately, that trade and investment will lead to development, which leads to more tax revenue, more jobs, which ultimately leads to better institutions and the stability that provides. So fundamentally, it is about creating opportunity, and it's opportunity not just for economic growth, but also for stability.
Sorry, I muted myself. Thank you very much, Mr. Allen. And I'll just note in passing that it's interesting because it's that kind of stability in terms of institutional stability that's part and parcel of applications that all international nations make to join sort of global compacts, global agreements, for example. So even in things such as NATO applications, people are looking at certain stability for certain member nations, and this contributes part and parcel to that good governance sort of model. But let me ask you something very specific. So I'm also a Muslim Canadian member of Parliament, and I've been quite taken by the Crimean Tatar situation because of what it represents in Ukraine, a minority group that has been the subject of aggression, including very recent aggression on the part of Russia. And we know that there was an annexation, and that annexation has not been accepted by Canada or many other nations. But I ask this because of the connection potentially to inclusive trade, because I know what we've tried to do with things such as the CUSMA and other agreements going forward, including women, Indigenous voices, things like Black entrepreneurs. Could you speculate about different ways which we might be able to empower what has been a targeted minority in Ukraine, empower them economically? So Crimean Tatars that might be living in Kiev or other parts of the country, for example, in terms of broaching this idea that when we're dealing with Kufta 2.0 and we're expanding it out to hitherto unrepresented businesses, how the Crimean Tatar voice could come to the fore, the same way we could be accentuating Indigenous voices here in Canada, a Tatar voice and Tatar business perspectives might be accentuated on the Ukrainian side of the ledgers. If you could explore that with us, please.
Sure. And in fact, inclusive trade is fundamental to our approach to trade in Canada. We design our trade agreements so that they do offer the opportunity and explicitly offer the opportunity for groups that have traditionally been underrepresented in trade to enjoy the benefits of these agreements. So you're absolutely right. We're going to seek to include modernized provisions on labor to prevent discrimination. We're going to seek the commitments to the International Labor Organization's fundamental codes. We're going to seek provisions on gender and trade with SMEs, and certainly in terms of Indigenous rights, that's going to be fundamental to what we're seeking. So you're absolutely right. That constellation of tools that will be put into an agreement not only highlights for these specific communities what's in the agreement for them, but it usually comes along with agreement to share information, to have dialogues with the groups and between the economies so that we can exchange best practices, so that we can work together to improve the lot of these groups. They're important parts of society, and our trade agreement, you're absolutely right, our trade agreements are designed to encourage that their growth.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, how much time do I have?
You don't have any. You have 15 seconds left, sir, and I don't think you can.
Well, I say thank you very much for your work, officials, and thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. On to 6 minutes for Monsieur Savard-Tremblay, please.
Je vous remercie. Merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the witnesses, and thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. How would you explain, in the light of your experience as negotiators and in the light of your experience in trade talks with the Ukraine, that since the signing, the effect has been basically null and void or quite marginal? There's been no increase in exports from Canada to the Ukraine. So how should we understand the fact that it's basically been a zero-sum game?
Well, in fact, the numbers appear to be a zero-sum game in the sense that they haven't gone up dramatically. But what has actually decreased is our exports of coal. But our exports of things like manufactured products and other products have actually increased quite dramatically, up to I believe it's 28% growth in those products. So we've stopped selling them things like coal, but we've started selling others. And overall, our trade is up, and it's growing. It is certainly on the right path to continued growth.
In terms of the figures, we can see there's an increase of 6%, and you'll correct me if I'm mistaken if you've got other figures, but what we can see is that the exports from Ukraine to Canada have gone up by 6.5%, but there's not really an increase on the other side. So Canadian exports don't seem to have increased. Between 2016 and 2020, the goods trade in average was at 340 million per year. So that's very, very little, isn't it?
Ukraine is about our 71st trade market in terms of bilateral trade. So it's definitely not our largest market, but there is lots and lots of room to grow. It's a market that sits at a really critical place in Europe. It's got agreements with the European Union, and its economy is growing. And we have to have confidence that it will continue to grow. With respect to Canadian trade, as I say, Canada's non-coal exports to Ukraine grew by 28.5% between 2016 and 2019. So that's significant growth. So while our overall exports are roughly the same, the composition of those exports is changing. And so we're moving away from export purely of coal to exporting other things, including machinery and equipment and some of these other manufactured products, which make it a more valuable type of export for us.
Thank you. Another question. We know that the Ukrainian government has affirmed that they've carried out a certain number of necessary reforms to stimulate growth and to fight against corruption in order to create a business climate that's more positive. So could you give us an update on the progress that has been made in terms of Ukrainian policies on these matters?
You're absolutely right. One of the things that we've been very impressed with is their efforts to continue to fight corruption. I know we've been specifically involved with training judges, and we've done a number of other programs. And I will turn to my colleague Andrew Turner to give a few more details. But overall, the perception of Ukraine as a business environment certainly appears to be one that is improving. Adding the types of predictability and the types of certainty that this modernization will produce will encourage more people to do business there, and it will encourage them to make changes or to continue making changes in their system, because the more you attract investment, the more you attract trade, the more interest there is domestically in terms of making those changes. So I think that it's a self-reinforcing thing to a certain extent. So if we have a moment, I'll maybe ask Andrew Turner just to tell us a little bit about the anti-corruption programs that we're working with them on.
Yes, we've seen several anti-corruption reforms in the decentralizing program that helps with local entrepreneurs, but I think that judicial reform is the most significant one, and there are two important laws that have been adopted, one in July last year, and we're going to continue to support these with the participation of Canadian judges to encourage the selection of qualified judges and to continue with this fight against corruption. So basically, you have taken note of real progress since the discussions were launched. Now, how much time do I have left?
Alors, écoutez, je vais arrêter là.
Well, I'll leave it there because I'd like to go to another subject. So I'll wait for my next round. Thank you.
Thank you. On to Mr. Massey, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for our witnesses. The first question I have, Mr. Allen, is with regards to businesses surrounding telecommunications and cybersecurity. I think that's one of the underestimated places where Canada can actually help the Ukraine in a significant way, and just wondering whether or not there's been a growth in those industries, especially given the fact that with Russia and other states, even outside of Russia, have taken such a aggressive stance on this. And this is where I would hope that we could actually provide some inroads as a country.
You're absolutely right, Mr. Massey. Or Chair, my apologies. Telecommunications is certainly a very big area for potential growth. It's one of the chapters that we're looking to add to the agreement. The agreement doesn't cover telecommunications at this point. So we would be looking to put in provisions that would facilitate trade in telecommunications equipment, facilitate trade and services relating to telecommunications, including with respect to security services. And I'll turn to my colleague, Darren Smith, who's the Acting Director General responsible for services and is, our longtime services negotiator. And maybe Darren will have something that he might want to add.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. I'll just effectively echo what Jay has just remarked. In terms of the Ukrainian market, there certainly is strong potential for the expertise and excellence of Canadian services in relation to cybersecurity and broadly speaking on telecommunication services to expand into the Ukrainian marketplace. At this point in time, I would say that it's more on the potential side. We are looking at, of course, at the FTA as an opportunity to provide, has been noted, further transparency and opportunities for greater certainty and predictability to help facilitate greater Canadian commercial interest into this marketplace. But I think that definitely can confirm that is definitely one of the areas where we see some commercial opportunity, and at the same time having downstream effects or positive benefits for broader security and other interests in this particular jurisdiction.
That's really interesting, and it would seem that that should actually be a priority, and at least in my opinion, on the surface of where we would find at least the Ukrainian population that I represent has been very concerned about this and also being targeted here at Industry Committee. We studied for the first time ever before fraud prevention, and part of that was the international component because I've been pushing for international agreements, not only just fraud in India, but other countries. And I would suspect, wouldn't that be the same thing as if we were able to augment those types of initiatives, it would also, stop, I guess, some of the harassment and challenges some of our own Ukrainian citizens face when they're engaged on social media and also fraud attacks.
Certainly. One of the interesting things about being in a trade negotiating session is that you do get to cover a lot of new areas and new ideas, and as things like this come to the fore, we can certainly talk about them at the table. You're absolutely right. Telecommunications and services associated with it are a big interest for Canada, and so we will certainly make use of these opportunities to talk about how we can protect our citizens and what we might be able to do in that context.
I think that was that Mr. Smith. Did you have a question answer on that too?
Yes, thank you. I would just also add that in addition to a robust cross-border trade and services chapter, and as well as communications, we're also looking at expanding the e-commerce chapter, although it would really be broader in terms of digital trade. And there, I would say that we have three baskets of activity. We're facilitating trade, we're looking at dealing with market access impediments, but we're also dealing with trying to build a greater trust and confidence on the part of users on online platforms and such. And indeed, I'll point to the fact that although the FTA won't be the panacea for all these myriad of challenges that exist within the cybersecurity realm, it does provide another platform for us to engage with our trading partner on these important issues and to reinforce efforts that we're undertaking in other forums, including the WTO. In that respect, we do have a proposal from Canada in that forum dealing with the protection of personal information that relates to people who could be subject to persecution from authorities for nefarious reasons. People are ethnic minorities, people belong to LGBTQ plus communities, etc. And we're trying to introduce these types of protections into our trade agreements so that governments are not using or demanding access on the personal information of users within the online realm to go and undertake activities that would be detrimental to themselves and certainly contrary to Canadian values.
That's really good to hear. And like I've had Ukrainian interns for probably about 14 of my 20 years in Parliament. Just the last couple of years have been interrupted, and other than that, it's been elections. And I find that some of the younger people who have, they come from the universities, very good skill sets in the digital economy. And they've also have some international experience as well, too, beyond just Canada and the Ukraine. So I just see that as a natural fit also to maybe, bolstering even entrepreneurship and confidence in investment if the digital aspect is rectified, because even in Canada, people are concerned about our and we've had our own challenges with Russian interference on that. And for investing in Ukraine, it would just only make a lot of sense to bolster the relationship by enhancing that safety and security through the digital lens of things. I think that's all my time, Madam Chair.
It is, yes. Thank you, Mr. Massey. Mr. Hoback for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here this afternoon. I'm just kind of curious, with what's going on in the environment in the Ukraine, how do you conduct the negotiations in this type of environment? Like, it must be rather tenuous.
Indeed. So we are going to be very pragmatic about this. We're making it clear that we're interested in working with them on a schedule that will suit them. As Mr. Turner said earlier, they've asked us to continue and to move ahead with these negotiations. So at this point, we will work with them on the pace that they are able to meet. Right now, thankfully, everything they seem ready to move ahead. We will very likely do our negotiations virtually, but if there's the opportunity for face-to-face negotiations, either in Ukraine or in Canada or in a third country location, we can take advantage of that as well. But obviously, we are sensitive, and we're not going to push them very aggressively in terms of timing. This will be, we will be cognizant of the situation.
I don't mean to interrupt, but we're going to have lots of questions, so we're going to have quicker answers, okay?
Sorry.
In a situation that we've had in our agreement right now, have you found situations where we've seen products going into Ukraine duty-free and all of a sudden ending up in Russia and places like that? Has there been any evidence of that in our existing agreements?
Not that I'm aware of. It hasn't been we haven't heard anything about that I'm aware of.
Will this agreement deal with money laundering and issues surrounding around money laundering? And again, as we look at oligarchs trying to take advantage of what's going on in Ukraine, what are we doing then for safeguards for that?
So we're looking to add a financial services chapter, which could have some tangential role to that. But I'll turn to my colleague Sven Linkhorst from Department of Finance, who could talk more about money laundering and how we're fighting against that as a government.
It'll have to be fast.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Allen. The financial services chapter doesn't deal directly with it, but it does include a prudential carve-out that would allow the federal regulatory or all regulatory authorities to take measures to protect the integrity of the financial system, which would include measures against money laundering that agencies such as FinTrack would implement, and in conjunction with Finance Canada and the government more broadly.
Okay, thank you. As we look at the agreement now, as we see what's happening in Ukraine, we have the Canadian government that is not providing armaments to Ukraine at this point in time. If a company wanted to sell into Ukraine, or if Ukrainian diaspora here says, hey, I'm going to purchase some armaments that I want to ship into Ukraine, is there anything in the trade agreements that are restricting that? Do we need to have any sign-off from the federal government, or can the private citizen just go ahead and do that?
On armaments?
Yeah.
So we do have an export control regime for arms and dual purpose goods. With respect to Ukraine in particular, we are following the situation very closely. However, I'll turn it over to Mr. Turner to again very quickly respond to the question generally.
Again, it would go through the export control regime. However, yes, Ukraine is a close partner, and we have not had any significant concerns with issues, so it would go through the process normally.
So there's a process in place that's no different than any other ally of ours. And then as far as EDC and CDC, what's happening there in regards to their activity in Ukraine? And I used to get really frustrated when we were doing business in Ukraine in the early 2000s. EDC would say they have this huge line of credit, but it's set up in such a way that nobody ever could access it, and whoever did use it wouldn't needed it because a bank would have done the same type of deal. So have we seen more aggressiveness in the EDC? And again, in light of the environment that's going on in Ukraine, how much is at risk with EDC and CDC with investments in Ukraine?
So my understanding is EDC has changed its risk profile for Ukraine, but beyond that, I can't go into what's at risk there, what they have invested there. It's just beyond my scope.
Okay, I'm done.
45 seconds.
Oh, well, I'm going to take my 45 seconds. as far as going back to money laundering, hard currency, that was one of the big issues in the early 2000s, is trying to sell something and get paid for it in U.S. dollars. So we were shipping sunflowers, for example, into Poland to get paid for our product we shipped into Ukraine. Are we seeing the IMF involved in Ukraine, and we're seeing a very stable exchange in regards to currency exchanges and things like that?
I'll turn to Mr. Turner.
Sorry, the IMF has been supporting Ukraine through a standby arrangement, and we're continuing to see good progress. Obviously, the current uncertainty is making things more challenging, but that's one of the reasons why Canada has stepped up to provide economic support, as have more and more of our G7 and NATO allies.
Last question. Now, we've committed a certain amount of funds, $200 million into Ukraine. Does that actually go to Ukraine, or is that actually there to shore up EDC and actual investments that are at risk in Ukraine and making sure that they're covered off?
Mr. Turner?
So the sovereign loan that's being negotiated right now will be directed to the areas that the government of Ukraine requests. So that's currently under discussion right now.
Okay. Thank you very much. On to Mr. Baker for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. And I just want to start by, I'm not a typical or regular member of this committee, so I just want to thank the members of the committee for studying this important issue that I think is a potential win for Ukraine, but also a great potential win for Canada as well. And I want to thank the officials who are here with us today and working on this really important issue and these negotiations. So thank you for all your work. Mr. Virani led off from the government side, and I want to say that Mr. Virani and I share our views. I share his views about what he said at the outset about Ukraine. Mr. Virani and I also share a border. Our ridings border each other, and both have very large Ukrainian-Canadian communities. So thank you, MP Virani, for your comments at the outset. I echo those. Mr. Allen, you spoke a little bit about a more valuable type of export for us in response to a prior question in terms of the mix of the exports that are coming from Canada to Ukraine and vice versa. Could you explain why you say that?
Well, it's about the type of export. It's not necessarily more valuable in terms of the what is sold, because the dollar value tends to be roughly the same. But we're moving more into a finished product, a processed product, as opposed to something like coal, which is still a very strong export for Canada. But it's changing the mix, and it's the value add element that is really substantially going up. As I say, non-coal exports went up by 28.5%. Now, not all of that is a manufactured product, but significant portion is.
Sure. So there's a value add component. Is it fair to say that that product mix offers a greater long-term potential as well in terms of just the amount of volume of exports?
It's hard to say. There's obviously long-term prospects in being able to export commodities as well as finished products. We have major industries in doing that, or that are involved in that. So I would say that anything that increases our capacity to export, anything that increases our linkages, is going to be good for our long-term prosperity. So, this agreement, as it stands, allows us to have really substantial market access for goods, but the modernization is going to take the extra part, which is going to bring in the other part of our economy, which is the services side of things. So I think overall, it's going to be a very, very positive story for us.
Yeah. When I speak to people who are really familiar with this issue, who do business in Ukraine or want to do business in Ukraine, many of them are also excited about the potential for this agreement to cover services, and which you've alluded to several times in this meeting. Could you talk a little bit about which services are we talking about? Where is the greatest potential in services here?
Yeah, so I think overall, because the agreement doesn't cover services right now, it's about creating an environment that will be really conducive to the services. So we have to remember that when we talk about services, it's about creating an enabling environment. It's about a set of rules. It's about a set of understandings that create transparency and predictability. With respect to particular industries, I'll turn it over to Darren Smith again. He's our expert on this.
Yes, and thank you, Chair, for the question. Canada does indeed have, I think, a diverse spectrum of services-based interest in terms of the Ukrainian market. You're looking at a range of professional services such as engineering or architectural services, just for example. The area of environmental services is certainly an area where you have Canadian expertise and potential in the Ukrainian market. Real estate services is an area that shows potential. And of course, my colleagues at the Department of Finance, look after issues in relation to financial services, whether it be banking or insurance. Now, some of these areas are perhaps more not in the present context, more in the future. But as Mr. Allen also alluded to as well, that with the increase or the potential for more goods-related trade, you also see a corresponding possibility for more services expertise being sold as well. So a good example would be Canada has a lot of expertise in the area of simulation equipment, flight simulators, and the ilk. But aside from the hardware itself, it's also the after-sale services that are also have a strong potential, whether it be on the training component or on other elements that deal with the use of the equipment. So these are the kinds of things that we think the FTA can achieve in its modernization phase, is expanding or diversifying the types of economic activities. And as a services-based economy, we have a diverse, capability that can be advanced in the Ukrainian context.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baker. On to Monsieur Savard Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you. Now, as we see in other FTAs, Canada and Ukraine have rules of origin. So a product has to come from the Ukraine or Canada to be able to benefit from these preferential tariffs. And we also know that in the Ukraine, we've got a large maritime share. Is it still under the control of the Ukraine, or is there some Russian interference with this big port in the Ukraine? How can we make sure that in a crisis situation, the rules of origin will still be respected? Have you seen that there's been any irregular activity with the main port?
So I'm not aware of any irregularities with respect to the main port. With respect to the rules of origin, they're pretty specific. It's pretty clear what those rules are, and the need to respect them is there. Right now, with respect to the situation, I think from my perspective, from what I'm aware of, things are flowing normally. Things are flowing relatively well. The Crimea's, the situation in the Crimea is obviously a little bit of a different element, and maybe Mr. Turner can add a little bit to the port issue.
No, I would say you're quite correct. There's no indications of any issues with regards to Odessa. We are seeing, of course, the challenges of Russia's illegal occupation and attempted annexation of Crimea, as well as its destabilizing activities in the Donbass. So there are those challenges, but not at the moment with Odessa.
Thank you very much, sir. On to Mr. Massey for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to follow up with some of the infrastructure that we could help with regards to border services, has there been any, or is there any part of a future agreement that we could do to help and assist with that? With the, everything from facilitating, assisting best practices for working on contraband and processing services that might be more efficient for the trade to happen, not only just for our benefit, but also for Ukraine with regards to their infrastructure on customs and immigration matters, especially related to trade.
Certainly. So I think there's a couple of things there. With respect to customs and trade facilitation, so the actual border process for goods, there are procedures in every one of our FTAs about how it's meant to be done. We look at reducing red tape, but we also look to add cooperative elements to these agreements where our experts can talk to their experts and talk about best practices in the way that we see things, the way that we do things. The second element about in terms of processing visitors and immigration, that's typically not covered by our FTAs, except to the extent that it's covered by temporary entry for business people, which is something that we're looking to add in and to refine in through the modernization.
Well, that's good to hear with that component too, because I see those things as, I mean, you mentioned it was good testimony here about the shifting type of trade between our two countries on the physical component, but I also look towards the procedural and more intellectual component to it, because that will also underpin, I think, confidence and trust and so forth, and deepen the relationship with those. And that's my questions, Madam Chair. Thank you very much to the witnesses.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Lewis for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and hello, colleagues. Thank you, witnesses, for your testimony this afternoon. Certainly a very interesting and busy day, to say the least. So my first question, I suppose I will, through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Allen. So with regard to auto trade, so I did some quick research this morning. I believe back in 2019, exports from Canada to the Ukraine was 8.15 million. With regard specifically to auto, and in 2019, equally, imports to Canada was 3.81 million. I have not been able to find any more recent numbers, so to speak. First question, sir, can you tell me, are those domestically built products specifically to our exports, or would those have been European products that came to Canada that were exported to the Ukraine?
Oh, Madam Chair, that's a good question. And based on the rules of origin, I would have to expect that they were Canadian-made vehicles. I'll have to turn to maybe Dean Foster, who's up here with me, to see if Dean has any information about that. But right now, unfortunately, I don't have a breakdown of what auto parts or what vehicles we sold. But I will say that last year it was our third largest component of our trade, at 13.5% of our trade. Dean, do you have any more recent numbers? Or
I could just add that I agree that it's a significant growing traded good. I don't have any reason to believe that it would be European origin cars that would be exported from Canada, as they're collected from in the trade statistics through Statistics Canada. So my assumption is that they're indeed Canadian.
Excuse me for interrupting. Mr. Foster, could you please turn your camera on?
Apologies, I lost my video at some point during the meeting, so it's not able to be turned back on, it appears.
Okay, I'm sorry. Apologies for the interruption. Please continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Allen and Mr. Foster. I appreciate that. And so just building off that, if I could please, so obviously Essex, along with Mr. Massey, Windsor West, we are very much automotive driven, not only with jobs, but with the industry itself. And so I know that we're going to be working very hard with regard to electric vehicles. I'm just curious, with regard to Ukraine, are they also heading that same direction? Is there an opportunity here that we could really be looking at to ensure that all the fantastic works that Canadians do and the industry does, we can export EVs across the ocean over to Ukraine?
Sure. As somebody who grew up in Windsor and whose parents still live in Windsor, I can tell you I'm keenly in touch with the auto industry, and I will say that absolutely, this agreement is designed to allow us to sell things like EVs. It's designed to allow us to have partnerships with respect to developing technologies and to using technologies and commercializing technologies. So absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. I know this is going to be a very it'd be a question that nobody really can answer, but I'm going to ask it anyways. And it really has to do with what we're all, I guess, the elephant in the room, right? With regard to, are they going to go to war, or are they not going to go to war? So I won't ask that question, but what I will ask, because I think it's really important that the conversation today, is what risk managements are put in place today with regard to our trading with Ukraine, and do we have a plan to deal with this, or is this something that needs to be a conversation going forward? I'm just very curious if we have a plan today to deal with our trade with Ukraine.
So obviously, our trade with Ukraine is already established. We have export controls for any products that would be sensitive, so things that we would not want to go. Thankfully, right now we're not in a situation where that's a reality, and I don't want to speculate too much about where we would go with this. Suffice to say, we are monitoring the situation very closely, and we would provide advice to the government based on the situation on the ground and what's in the best interest of Canadians.
Thank you, Mr. Allen.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you.
30 seconds. So I don't think you can get a question in there in 30 seconds. Well, you might be able to. Mr. Meow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for all the witnesses attending today. Mr. Allen, you have mentioned in your opening remark that CUFTA included a review clause that commits to, the party to review the agreement within 2 years of entry into force. Is that a standard clause to include in FTA? And what were the intention from which parties when negotiating that clause?
Sure. So, Madam Chair, we typically, I won't say typically, we wouldn't typically include a review clause, but it's something we often include. In this case, we included it because there were such fundamental elements of the agreement that weren't included. We didn't include services or investment, for example. And those are cross-border trade and services and investment are fundamental to our FTAs. So we included that provision with the full support of the Ukrainian government, because we recognized that at the time their regulatory system was in such flux that they weren't sure what they were going to be able to agree to, and what we didn't want was a situation where we potentially came away from the negotiations with an agreement that walked back even the protections that we had in our 1995 Foreign Investment Protection and Promotion Agreement. So we put in the review clause with the idea that within 2 years we would look to see how we could deal with CBT, cross-border trade and services, financial services, investment, and a number of other areas. So it was fully anticipated that this would happen, and it was fully supported by both parties at the time.
Okay, and then in 2020, Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia were Canada's three highest value exporter of goods to Ukraine. And you have mentioned in your opening remark that fish and seafood, vehicle, and machinery are a good part of Canada export to Ukraine. What would be some of the sector that could potentially grow and benefit the most from a modernized agreement?
From a goods perspective, once we hit 2024, we will have the full tariff elimination. So over the next couple of years, we will see tariffs eliminated, which will allow further growth, including in exports like pork, which currently still has tariffs. But from a goods market access perspective, we're not looking to reduce tariffs in any other places because there really aren't that many tariffs left to reduce once we hit 2024. So where we're looking for growth is going to be on the services side. And as Mr. Smith highlighted earlier, there are things like environmental services and financial services, insurance, education. Those are some of the real growth areas that we see.
And have any province or territories expressed support or opposition to the modernization of CUFTA? Have they identified particular areas of concern in their existing agreement?
No, in fact, in 2020, we consulted Canadians, and what we found was that broadly speaking, Canadians were supportive, and during that consultation, I think, my apologies, the number escapes me, but we heard from 5 or 6 provinces, and they were all supportive. You know, the types of concerns that we hear about an agreement like this is that, you know, when we're doing a modernization, we hear concerns about supply management where, you know, we don't want openings for supply management, and absolutely that is not on the table. We will not provide any more market access or any market access for supply managed goods. But we typically didn't hear negatives about this. There was a lot of support. People saw that adding services and investment completes the picture.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Allen.
Much. On to Mr. Patzer, please.
Thank you very much. Just wondering if you can just update us right now where we are at for trading agricultural products to Ukraine under the current agreement.
Sure. I'll turn to Dean Foster. Dean, do you have some numbers on agricultural products?
Sure, Jay, and apologies again that my video is no longer working. So we are indeed seeing growth, in various products in the ag sector. One that I would mention is pet food, actually, looking like up towards $9 million in 2021, up from $6 million in 2019. Frozen fish, which is not ag but food, up over 50 million, looks like, for 2021. Based on preliminary numbers. We also see chilled and frozen pork up around near $6 million exports in 2021. And that was one of the big tariff elimination items for Ukraine in the FTA, just to give a few examples.
Right on, thank you. What about as far as the manufacturing side as well? I'm just wondering, I've just been talking to a few different groups in my riding as well, and there's some concern about certification between countries, and just wondering if there's a chance to update or modernize this agreement so that we have certainty in the certification between Canada and the Ukraine within the context of manufacturing.
Mm-hmm. So our technical barriers to trade chapter facilitates that exact thing. It's about looking at regulations and looking at harmonization, or if not harmonization, looking at compatibility of regulations, and putting in place systems so that regulators can talk to one another, specifically to avoid regulatory hurdles. So I'm very happy to say that that's in the agreement already. I don't know that there was a meeting of the minds in terms of updating that chapter. We have a WTO agreement that underpins the technical barriers to trade chapter. So I don't know that there's a lot more that can be done, but suffice to say, we do have the facility under the agreement. It's only been in place for a couple of years. To help to reduce those barriers for people, because certification is a very big issue. You're absolutely right.
So one of the other, I'm just asking specifically about agricultural manufacturing again, because I do know there's quite a few manufacturers in Saskatchewan who ship products over there. How much room for growth is there in the Ukraine for that? I mean, I'm hearing reports that their equipment is like 30, 35, 40 years old over there, that there's a great market opportunity there to try to help them. So what is there any proactive clauses or parts of the trade agreement where we can actually try to help boost and increase their use of more modern machinery and quite frankly, even agricultural practices?
So we typically don't do that within an FTA, but what we do in Canada is we work with the Trade Commissioner Service, Export Development Canada, BDC, to help sell our products there. And the Trade Commissioner Service are really excellent in terms of promoting Canadian goods there and running and facilitating entrees into various things, whether it's trade shows or going to meet with industry associations. And that's how we typically will help industries get their products into a market is through the Trade Commissioner Service and some of these other services, rather than putting it directly into a trade agreement, because it's pretty difficult to negotiate something that specific into an agreement.
Okay, thank you. I guess lastly, I'm just kind of curious, just kind of looking around the region, just wondering what would be the ramifications if Canada were, say, to impose Magnitsky sanctions. What would that do to any potential trade, or maybe just kind of the general atmosphere over there if we were to, say, use Magnitsky sanctions?
Well, for that, I will turn to my colleague Andrew Turner.
So Canada has been very clear, along with our allies and partners, the G7 and G20, that we are all collectively prepared to impose sanctions that will have massive economic consequences and impose severe costs on Russia if they choose to invade Ukraine. So again, we continue to pursue diplomatic options so that this will not be necessary. But in support for that, we're also pursuing the path of deterrence to make it clear that Russia will face these costs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patzer. On to Mr. Raya for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is to Mr. Allen. Mr. Allen, we talk about inclusive trade objectives. We include gender, indigenous peoples, etc. Is it something that used to be considered previously, or other countries, say like United States or United Kingdom, who have got very extensive trade across the world, do they include any provisions related to the so-called inclusive trade practices?
I'm very happy to say that it is a growing number of countries that are including them. Maybe not to the extent that Canada is, but certainly, some of our partners like New Zealand and Chile have partnered with us in terms of the global action, gender, oh my goodness, GTAG, Global Trade and Gender Initiative. And so there are quite a number of countries that are starting to do it, and more, and it's seeing its way into a number of types of things. One that for example, the UK is putting a real emphasis on is labor. For example, we're seeing it in the United States where they're putting a big emphasis on labor. In terms of seeing gender and some of the other elements, it maybe hasn't caught on quite to the extent, but I'm very happy to say that it is catching on. And I've got a colleague with us, Sean Clark. Maybe I'll ask Sean if he wants to add anything on inclusive trade. He's our director responsible for inclusive trade.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Allen. We do have quite a bit of work going on in Canada as leading in international fora, including the WTO, to promote women's economic empowerment and promoting opportunities for SMEs at the WTO as well. The work is spreading. It's taking some time, but there are more and more countries coming on board.
Okay, thank you. When it comes to modernization of this agreement, am I correct if I say that is basically we are negotiating a part of the trade agreement that was not concluded earlier, that is services and investment?
That's correct. So we're looking to add a number of things, services and investment, telecommunications, temporary entry, but we're also looking to update some of our existing chapters like e-commerce, transparency, government procurement. Labor chapter is one that we're looking to update, and our environmental commitments under the agreement. So then we will be seeking to add inclusive elements. Sorry, I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Okay. Okay. And, one particular thing you mentioned that it will cover temporary entry of business persons. How come that? Is that normally part of any trade agreement?
Yes, it is. So we will typically take commitments on a reciprocal basis where we will work with the other country and we will facilitate the entry of certain categories of business people to make it easier for them to come in, whether it's to provide aftermarket service for goods that they've sold, to provide consulting services and a number of different areas. So it absolutely is a feature of our agreement. And maybe I'll ask if Darren Smith wants to add anything on temporary entry.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. I'll just quickly add that it includes areas like business visitors, intercompany or intercorporate transferees, other specialists, and then as well potentially spouses. So basically, we're providing for greater certainty and predictability. But in this case, this is really a market access change where you're actually seeing liberalization take effect. And so it is definitely an area where we see as being conducive to help facilitating work in goods exports, investment, services, government procurement, and other areas. So it will be a feature of the agreement.
And Mr. Allen, you mentioned that this modernization will increase the benefits for Canadian workers, entrepreneurs, and small business. Can you just highlight on how it can increase the benefits?
Sure. The existing agreement, as I say, is really focused around goods trade. So these other elements that it will open up to our services providers. It will open up services for that relate to goods trade. So in a lot of cases, you sell a product, but then you want to do the services afterwards. Or we're looking to modernize the government procurement provisions, which will allow more Canadians to sell more product into Ukraine. So really, it really is about creating opportunities. And so it's just about creating more opportunities.
And lastly, I know the situation is quite fluid and dynamic over there. We have said we are going to launch it. Typically, if there are no issues on the ground, typically how much time it takes to conduct a review, in this case, basically adding service and investments to the existing agreement.
Can we have a brief answer, Mr. Allen?
Yes. Typically, a trade negotiation takes a long time, in part because goods are very sensitive. This should be much shorter timeline, assuming we can get to there to do it. But I can't give an exact figure for how long.
Thank you very much. Mr. Savard-Tremblay, do you have any additional questions?
Yes, I've got one brief one, if you allow me to do so, Madam Chair. In fact, on the Canadian government website, it talks about security and stability on the page which talks about a possible modernization of this agreement with the Ukraine. Now, there's more trade with Russia than with Ukraine, so having a new bilateral agreement which seems to be punitive in nature and which has also perhaps an aggressive objective against Russia without including Russia, will that not mean that we'll be actually isolating Russia and provoking our adversary and pushing it into the arms of China, perhaps?
We have an existing trade agreement with Ukraine. It's been in place for a number of years, and we've been working on it since, or we worked on it since 2010. So it was a long time in the making. So I don't think this addition will change anything. What I think it is it's a very clear signal of our support for Ukraine and our continued belief in their integrity and their sovereignty. So I don't look at it from the perspective that it's going to hurt relations with Russia or with have any geopolitical effect from that standpoint. I think it's emboldening the people of Ukraine, and it's us standing with them, not against somebody else.
Thank you very much. Yes. On to Mr. Massey. Do you have any additional questions?
Just one quick one, Madam Chair. Aside the energy sector and the obvious dependency between Ukraine and Russia, are there any other sectors that have that type of a dependency between the two nations that would become even more complicated should hostilities continue to ramp up?
I'll turn right to Mr. Turner on that one.
Well, as with any neighboring countries, there are many economic ties between the two countries. The reality is that should Russia proceed with military action, that will have massively destabilizing consequences for the entirety of the economy, and much beyond that, of course, for Ukraine. But likewise, because of the very severe and significant reaction that there will be from the international community, the same will occur for Russia as well.
Yeah, but is there something like grain or something else that sticks out larger than energy is one, but is there some other trading component that there might be some strategic requirements for allied nations to try to enhance that trade? I just throw out grain because it's just another example of local produce, but at any rate.
Certainly Ukraine's exports of grain are quite significant, but I must confess I'm not sure if they are specifically to Russia. So that is something I can look into and get back to the committee on.
That's fine. That's fair enough. It just was curious on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. On to Mr. Martel. He has one question.
Oui.
Yes, Madam Chair. The witnesses seemed a bit lost earlier with my questions, but what I'm aiming at, Madam Chair, is that one of the central elements is the question of energy dependence of our allies and also Ukraine. So I have a simple question. So if we up our LNG exports to our allies in Ukraine, could that reduce their dependence on Russia, and could it also help them if there is a possible conflict?
Madam Chair, I would expect that, yes, if we were to increase our LNG exports, it would certainly reduce dependence on Russian natural gas.
Merci.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick question. I'm just seeing it's breaking here now, colleagues. PM's confirmed $7.1 million worth of lethal equipment to Ukraine and a new $500 million loan to Ukraine. So I'm just kind of curious to the negotiators, when we see something like this happens, how's the process in regards to this lethal equipment being confirmed? How does that go about? And does it impact our trade processes in your negotiating a new deal? Does it come into consideration?
No. In fact, something like that would be squarely outside of the trade agreement. And I would turn to Mr. Turner for more information on that. But I will simply say that that's not the type of thing that's included in an FTA.
Mr. Turner?
Again, no. It would as we've seen with the other agreements that have been discussed previously on the sovereign loan. This would be something that would be done bilaterally between the two governments rather than through the trade process.
So there's nothing that would stop this in a trade agreement?
Not that I'm familiar with, no.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Sheehan, do you have any questions?
Well, sorry about that. Just one very quick one. And I was reading some information on the website about steel and iron ore. How might this agreement or process that we're undertaking affect the steel and iron ore industry in both mutual countries, through you to Jay, perhaps, or Mr. Turner?
Sure. Madam Chair, I would expect it wouldn't have a great impact at this point because tariffs on these traded products have already been reduced. And in fact, I think, I'm just checking my list here. Yeah, I believe steel products and certain iron products have already had their tariffs eliminated by Ukraine for Canadian exports. So we're already exporting them to them duty free, and I believe coming back this way as well. So I don't think any modernization, because it's not touching tariffs, would have an impact.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Mr. Baker, last question.
Thanks very much. So I just wanted to quickly allude to what Mr. Hoback had raised, which I think is excellent news, that the government's announced that Canada's sending lethal weapons to Ukraine to help to deter an invasion by Russia, but also to help the Ukrainians defend themselves. And they're supporting that as well with a $500 million loan as well. So I think that's an excellent sign of Canada's support for Ukraine. And that, to me, sort of reinforces what we've heard from our witnesses today, that I think Mr. Allen said that we stand with the Ukrainian people. The free trade agreement is part of that package of things that we're doing to stand with the Ukrainian people. Today's announcement is very, very important, obviously, in the short term, and I look forward to seeing our officials continue their work with our Ukrainian counterparts to see the CUFTA modernized, because it offers tremendous benefits for Ukraine and Canadians in the long term. So thank you.
Very much. I want to thank all of the witnesses. I think everybody's gotten their questions asked that they wanted to today as we begin to take a look at the Canada-Ukraine trade deal and just where we can go with it. So thank you very much to all of our witnesses. To the committee, we will move adjournment. Thank you very much.